Today, we are diving deep into thousands of years of ancient Indian history. And believe me, this is an incredible story. It's a story of lost cities, world-changing ideas, and huge empires that didn't just shape a subcontinent, they really did change the world. So let's get right into it. Think about this for a second. How is it possible that one single region managed to invent the concept of zero, create some of the world's first planned cities, and give birth to not one, but four major world religions? That's the core question we're going to explore. To figure it out, we've got to go way back to the beginning. All right, so we've broken this massive history down into four key eras of transformation. First, we'll dig into the very foundation, India's first mysterious cities. Then, we'll look at the blueprint for a new social and spiritual world. After that, we'll see the rise of giant, continent-spanning empires. And finally, we'll watch the dawn of a new medieval age. Okay, so our journey starts more than 5,000 years ago, right at the foundation of Indian civilization. And what we find here is a society that was so advanced, it was right up there with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet so much about it is still a complete mystery. I mean, just look at this timeline. The age of this civilization is just staggering. People started farming here around 7,000 BCE, but the real explosion happened around 2600 BCE. This is when these massive, planned cities popped up and thrived for hundreds of years before things started to wind down. And the level of sophistication here is just incredible. We're not talking about a few mud huts. These were huge, meticulously planned cities built on grids with standardized, baked bricks. They even had homes with multiple rooms and courtyards. Their trade network went all the way to modern-day Iraq. And maybe the most fascinating part? They had a written language that, even today, nobody can read. And then, it was gone. Almost as mysteriously as it appeared, the Indus Valley civilization just faded away. Its great cities were abandoned. This left a huge vacuum, which, as we're about to see, was quickly filled by new people with some revolutionary new ideas. So, as that chapter closed, a totally new one began. This next era, the Vedic Age, wasn't really about building massive cities. It was about building something much more permanent, the social and spiritual blueprint that would go on to shape India for thousands of years. So, what was the Vedic Age? Well, it's defined by the arrival of new groups, the Indo-Aryans, who migrated into northern India. They brought with them the Sanskrit language, and just as importantly, a collection of sacred texts, hymns, prayers, rituals, called the Vedas. These texts are the foundation of what we now know as Hinduism. Now, this era also introduced a really powerful new social structure known as the Varna system. It basically organized everyone in society into four distinct hereditary classes. You had the Brahmins, the priests, at the top, then the Kshatriyas, the warriors and rulers, the Vaishyas, who were merchants and farmers, and the Shudras, the laborers. This rigid pyramid would become a defining and often controversial feature of Indian society. But whenever you get a rigid system like that, you're bound to get some pushback. And that's exactly what happened. New spiritual movements, called the Shramana traditions, started popping up. They totally rejected the idea that you needed priests and rituals to connect with the divine. Instead, they focused on personal liberation through things like meditation and self-discipline. They were directly challenging the old way of doing things. And all of this spiritual debate and questioning led to something absolutely huge: the birth of two new major world religions, Buddhism and Jainism. Both of them grew directly out of that Shramana movement, and both were founded by teachers who basically said, you don't need the Brahmin priests. There's another path to enlightenment. Okay, so now we shift gears. We have this landscape of small kingdoms, competing ideas, and new religions. But all of that is about to get forged into something completely new. For the very first time, the Indian subcontinent is going to be brought together under the rule of one massive empire. In 322 BCE, an absolute genius of a strategist named Chandragupta Maurya creates the Mauryan Empire. And this was a real turning point. It wasn't just another kingdom. This was the first true empire to unite almost the entire Indian subcontinent under a single ruler. The empire grew to its largest size under Chandragupta's grandson, the famous Emperor Ashoka. But that growth, it came at a terrible price. During his conquest of the kingdom of Kalinga, it's estimated that over 100,000 people were killed. The sheer horror of the Kalinga War seems to have caused a profound change in Ashoka. He was so horrified by the violence he had caused that he completely renounced conquest. He converted to Buddhism and totally transformed his government, ruling instead by principles of nonviolence and tolerance. It was a radical change of direction. Now, after the Mauryan Empire eventually collapsed, India broke up into smaller kingdoms again for about 500 years. But out of that period of fragmentation, a new dynasty rose up in the north and kicked off what many call India's classical golden age.
The Gupta Empire oversaw this incredible explosion of culture and science. During this golden age, Indian mathematicians developed the concept of zero and the decimal system, ideas that literally form the basis of all modern math and science. Astronomers were figuring out that the Earth spins on an axis. And you had masterpieces of art, literature, and medicine being created. It was an amazing time.
But, as we know, great empires don't last forever. The Guptas' power faded, and its collapse around the 6th century pushed India into its early medieval age. This wasn't an era of unity, but of a complex, shifting mosaic of different regional powers. So what did this new era look like? Well, a good way to think about it is a system sometimes called Indian feudalism. Instead of one big ruler, power was spread out. Kings would grant land to local lords or to temples, and in return, they'd get loyalty and soldiers. It created this really complex web of alliances and rivalries. And this new map was covered with powerful regional kingdoms, all fighting for influence. For example, over in the east, you had the Pala dynasty, who were huge supporters of Buddhism. While down in the center of India, in the Deccan Plateau, the Rashtrakutas built a massive kingdom of their own. And then way down in the south, the Cholas created this powerful empire that controlled trade across the Indian Ocean. So it was this incredibly dynamic, complex world with many different centers of power. But into this fragmented but vibrant subcontinent, a powerful new force began to make its presence felt. Starting around the 8th century, Arab and Turkic traders, and later conquerors, started entering from the northwest, and they brought with them a new religion, Islam. This would change the course of Indian history forever. And this really set the stage for one of the most important cultural interactions in all of world history. The arrival of Islam marks the end of India's ancient era and the beginning of a whole new chapter, one of conflict, but also of synthesis and incredible transformation. But that is a story for another time.